We are looking today at the aggregate supply curve, and in particular the long-run aggregate supply curve. And we're going to see that there are two models or two perspectives. And today we're looking at the one on the right called the neoclassical perspective. We see that the aggregate supply curve is vertical, and we will be looking next lesson at the Keynesian aggregate supply curve. The one over here, where it has quite a different shape, which we will explain at that time. So the neoclassical perspective, it builds on the work of classical economists of the 19th century, and some of the key principles include the importance of the price mechanism in coordinating economic activity. So price is key, and we're dealing with the concept of a perfectly competitive market equilibrium. And we're looking at the economy as a harmonious system that automatically tends towards what we call full employment. Here are some of the past economists involved with the neoclassical perspective, very famous ones. The long-run aggregate supply and long-run macroeconomic equilibrium. How are real GDP and the price level affected when the economy moves into the long run? And economists disagree. So today, as I said, we're looking at the neoclassical perspective. And the neoclassical economists believe in the long run that all resource prices, including wages, change so as to match changes in the price level. And this will become much clearer as we move along. But the main thing to take into account is that all resource prices change in response to some change in the price level. This has a really important implication for the shape of this long-run aggregate supply curve. And the curve is vertical at what we call potential GDP, or the full employment level of real GDP, which is also the same thing as at the level of the natural rate of unemployment. So if we look at that notion of potential GDP, remember that's where all of our resources are being used efficiently. So vertical LRAS curve. Now I tend to use LAS to shorten it, long run aggregate supply curve. It's going to be vertical. Call this the LAS. And this is also at the level of potential GDP. And we have all resources being used efficiently. And in terms of the quantity, we don't use Q, we're going to use Y, and you'll often see FE. So the level of national income at the full level of employment. This is the same thing as producing at the LAS. What's critical here is that this vertical curve indicates that in the long run, a change in the price level does not give rise to any change in the quantity of real GDP produced. So in other words, we could have a price level down here, or here, or here, but the level of quantity is the same, and this is where all the resources are being used efficiently. So price is not going to be the driving factor that brings us back to this particular quantity at the full level of employment. Economy is in a long-run equilibrium when all of the curves intersect. So we've got, the AD curve. We have SAS. I hope I'll be able to draw this through there. And then we have LAS. Remember that we refer to this as output or real GDP. And on the y-axis, not price, but price level. And once again, we're not dealing with Q, but Y, and I'll call this FE, the level of national income at the full employment level. All right, so they all intersect at the same point, and we are in the long run equilibrium. But if the LAS curve is vertical at the level of potential GDP, Then what's interesting is we had looked before at recessionary and inflationary gaps when the AD had shifted left and the AD had shifted right, and our short-run equilibrium was to the left or right of the LAS curve. So if the LAS curve is vertical at the potential GDP, it means that recessionary and inflationary gaps are only short-run phenomena that cannot persist in the long run. So this is tremendously important, because if governments are doing expansionary policies to shift aggregate demand to get there to be more output and lower unemployment, then we know that these shifts of AD, if they're moving away from the LAS curve, that they're only going to be short run. And won't persist in the long run, because there's going to be these forces moving you back to the long run equilibrium. So as soon as the economy moves into the long run, the recessionary and inflationary gaps disappear, and the economy moves automatically towards full employment equilibrium. So in other words, what we've seen recently is a huge amount of monetary stimulus spending by governments to get economies up and running and expanding. And if we are operating outside of that long-run equilibrium with the LAS curve, any of these actions will only be short-run in nature. Very powerful. All right, now we're not going to look at this short run and long run on many slides, so please pay particular attention over the next couple of slides, because this is really key. So we're going to look at the short run, which I'll do in blue, and then long run, which I'll do in red. So let's have an increase in government spending. Government spending is part of the components of aggregate demand, so AD is going to shift to the right. So we're going to call this AD2, and we have a new point of equilibrium. So in the short run, so let's call this Y2, YFE, and we'll call this PE to P2. Okay, so in the short run, we know output has gone up. We know unemployment has gone down, and we know that the price level has gone up. But this is the short run equilibrium. Remember, there's going to be forces pulling us back to the long run equilibrium. So let's look at that in red. So in the long run, now I just want to draw your attention back to, in the long run, all of the factor costs can change, including wages. So imagine that you're in a situation where you know the economy is really hot. In fact, we are having unemployment that's below the natural rate of unemployment. Your wages have not yet changed, and yet you're seeing an increase in the price level. In reaction to this, there's going to be upward pressure on wages. As you know that firms can't find enough workers, you know they're doing really, really well, and your wages are now buying you less because the price of other things around you have gone up. So if there's upward pressure on wages, the costs of production have increased, and so SAS shifts left. And now it's not just wages that might increase, it might be also other input costs, but we'll focus on wages now. So if SAS shifts to the left, we'll shift it back to the long run equilibrium. So here's SAS2. Here's our new point. And so once again, we're on the long run equilibrium. We're still at the output that we were before at potential GDP. The price has increased, and now we've returned to that long run equilibrium. Return to long run equilibrium. So the blue was in the short run. We had AD shifting to the right, and then in response to the increase in prices, we had wages increasing. Let's look at this again in blue for short run and red for the long run. Let's have an increase in personal taxes. Well, increase in personal taxes will affect how much money consumers have to spend. So C will decrease. C is a component of AD. So we'll have AD shifting to the left. And so in the short run, we have output is down. We have unemployment is up. And we have price level down. Now you can imagine what's going to happen in an economy that's sluggish. We've seen an economy for quite a few years that's been sluggish around the world, economies plural. So in response to prices decreasing and the fact that unemployment is now beyond the natural rate of unemployment, firms have the upper hand. People are looking to find employment, those who are unemployed. And there, at this point, at this new point of equilibrium, there is now a downward pressure on wages. So in the long run, we now have downward pressure on wages. And it could be not just wages, but other input costs too. But wages are what we're going to call sticky downwards. So in other words, it's going to take time for wages to fall. But with wages falling, the cost of production decrease, so our SIS curve will shift to the right. And we will have a new equilibrium in the long run. So our new equilibrium is here. We are back again at potential GDP in terms of output. The price level in this case has fallen, and we are back to a long-run equilibrium. So long-run equilibrium. So the neoclassical economists believe that the economy will make these adjustments from the previous slide and this slide, whether AD has shifted to the right or to the left, and then the adjusting wages. They feel that the market will do this automatically, albeit in this circumstance it may take a bit of time because of wages being sticky downwards, but the market will self-correct, returning to this harmonious equilibrium at potential GDP. In the neoclassical perspective, recessionary and inflationary gaps are eliminated in the long run by flexibility in resource prices. So we saw this where, in our example, wages adjusted, and so the inflationary and deflationary gaps disappeared. And in terms of the slides, if you go back 2 slides where AD shifted right, we had, of course, an inflationary gap. And when we looked at the most recent slide, just previous to this, we had a deflationary gap where AD had shifted to the left. Now, just a reminder, inflationary and deflationary gaps are caused by AD shifting. This ensures that in the long run, the LAS curve will be vertical at the level of potential GDP, which we've talked about. And the economy has this built-in tendency towards full employment equilibrium. With the neoclassical interpretation of the AD-AS models, changes in aggregate demand can have an influence on real GDP only in the short run. We've mentioned this already. In the long run, they only result in increases in the price level, having no impact on real GDP, as this remains constant at the level of potential output and the LAS curve. So here is one assignment, and the assignment will also be given, I believe, separately on Blackboard. Okay, economic growth in the AD-AS model. So what we're going to look at, unlike the PPF model where the PPF would shift outwards, we're going to have changes in the LAS curve. And it will shift to the right or to the left depending on if we have economic growth or if this has been diminished. So real GDP in the long run is determined by the position of the LRAS curve, which is determined by the economy's potential output. So again, using all of their resources efficiently. Over a period of time, potential output can change. The LAS curve shifts to the right or to the left in response to factors that increase or decrease potential output. And I'd like to remind you that those are things that improve or increase the factors of production, capital, entrepreneurship, land, labor, or technology. So potential output is the quantity of goods and services, or real GDP, that an economy can produce given its factors of production, which I just mentioned, and its technology, assuming that there is full employment. Remember, and we're going to look at this more in detail when we do unemployment, but there's still some unemployment, which is the natural rate of unemployment. It doesn't mean that employment is down to zero. A rightward shift of the LAS curve indicates an increase in potential output, and a leftward shift indicates a decrease. And this is simply another way of representing economic growth. So if we look at the example up here, if we had economic growth, we know that the PPF would shift to the right. And if we were dealing with neoclassical model, we'd have LAS1, and it would shift to the right to LAS2. So what causes LAS to increase or shift rightwards? Well, as I mentioned, an increase or improvement in the factors of production, the cell, or an improvement in technology, increases in efficiency, and this results in a reduction in the natural rate of unemployment. Opposite events would of course cause the PPF and the LAS to decrease or shift left. Factors that cause LAS to shift. So if LAS shifts, SAS is going to shift. So when you show economic growth, if you show LAS increasing, then you need to show also correspondingly that SAS has shifted. Because anything that increases or improves the factors of production will also have that short-run effect as well. Now, this is a bit of a tricky, it's not a trick question, but are there factors that can shift SAS without shifting LAS? So if we think SAS will shift if we have a change in input costs. If we can have a change in input costs without there being an increase or improvement in the factors of production or technology, then the SAS curve may shift and the LAS may not. Also, we might have something that has a temporary impact on aggregate supply, which would shift SAS for a short while leaving the LAS curve unchanged. So an example could be really bad weather conditions during a growing season and agricultural output drops. The SAS curve will shift to the left for that season, but then will come back to the original position when the weather returns to normal. But the LAS curve remains unaffected because that's the long run. Changes in the firm's costs of production, such as changes in wages, or then changes in the prices of other key inputs, such as oil or other input costs, may also only affect the SAS curve. Again, you have to ask yourself, have the factors of production improved or increased? So if you've had an increase in wages, no, the factors of production have not changed. So this applies to temporary changes that do not have a lasting impact on real GDP produced. And we have also a last assignment, which is probably posted on Blackboard as well, but here are the questions. Thank you.